Now finally, REST APIs are something called stateless, meaning that calls can be made independently of one another, and each call contains all the data necessary to complete itself successfully. A server doesn't need to keep memorizing things. Each request that comes in has enough information that the server can respond with, regardless of who that person is. So in this example, let's build a small little app that has a RESTful API. Let's make this a lot smaller. There you go, we have our previous example. We'll start the server and talk about some of the things that we can do here. Well, when we look at a GET request, this GET request, let's actually remove this as well, just so it's not too messy. This GET request will have a request object that we receive. Now, this request object can have a few things. We can have request.query. We can have request.body, which we saw in the previous video. We also have request.header, again, something that we've seen before, and also request.params. And this is probably the most used properties of request. So let's go through it one by one. Request.query is what we get when we do a GET query. For example, within here, if I do a console.log request query, well, I can go to localhost, and in here, something that we've already talked about, I can add a question mark to say that this is a query string and say name equals Andre and age equals 31. I press enter, go back, and I see here that I have name is Andre, age is 31, because I have access to the query string. We also have request body, which again, we've talked about. Using something like URL encoded or JSON body parsers, we can add that middleware to receive whatever the request sends in the body. We also have request.headers. So if I console.log request.header, well, this time using Postman, I can say in the header, and it has a nice header tab, we see that we have content type application JSON, which automatically does it because the last request was a JSON request. But I can put in anything here. I can say name is Andre, or this time, just to change it, we'll say Sally. If I send this, oh, and this is a delete method. Let's make sure it's a get method. If I send this, I see that now request.header have all these headers, but also name Sally. Very cool. And then finally, we also have something called request.params. And if I console log request.params, this is a syntax where you use the parameters of the URL. If I do the semicolon, and then let's say ID, I save this, and now we have access to whatever the parameter is of the URL. So let's just say 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'll remove the header for now. If I send, I now have ID 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, awesome. And you can have as many parameters as you want, and you can nest them. But we have access to our request information, which is fantastic. Now, when we send a response, we also want to have a bit of an option as to what we want to send. Well, with a response, we can say that with sending, we also want to respond with a status. Let's say a status of 404. And we can say send, not found. If I refresh and send now, I get not found. I get not found with a status of 404. Again, if I go back to my browser and refresh, I have in my network tab a 404 status. All right, perfect. And again, you customize so that we have a RESTful API, the get, post, put, and delete to follow the rules that the web browsers expect. Now, one last thing. Up until now, we're just sending data back and forth, but what if we wanted to serve something called static assets? That is index.html, CSS file, JavaScript file. That's more realistic, right? Usually we want an index file and having our app run. Well, that's very easy to do. We can create within this project, let's just do a new folder called public. And this name might be familiar to you because when we did create React app, public was there and it held all of our static files. So in here, let's just do a new file, index.html. Now within this public file, we'll just do a quick HTML document that says hi. And within here, I'll say it's working. In order to get Express to send static files, we can just remove this for now, just to keep things clean, and do another middleware, app.use. And this comes with Express already. We do express.static. And within here, we give it the file path. In our case, we know that we want to get the dir name, which we've seen in previous video, which is the directory of where we are. In our case, it's node. And we want to go to the public folder. So we do public. This is going to print out node, then public. So now if I save this and go back to our GET request, I get it's working. Let me make that bigger so you can see. And if we open up our console and our network tab, I refresh, I get, let's do a hard refresh, I get 200. I get text HTML, and the response is my HTML file. And if I had CSS link here, it will load the CSS in my public folder. If I had a JavaScript file, then it will load it because within the body we can add a script tag. And this is a server that we just built that serves simple static assets. And as soon as we want to have something like an API where we interact with it, we do get, post, put, delete, that's when we start using our methods that we learned previously. Very cool. Now that we have this basic foundation, we're going to build our server for our app. The app that we build in our final project, our image recognition app, well, we're going to build the backend for that now. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Something we've talked about. Remember how I said a web browser sends a request and just hopes that the server returns what the browser asked for. Google servers can send us whatever it wants. It doesn't have to follow the rules that perhaps the web browser sets. With RESTful API, we're able to create an API that is RESTful, something that follows the rules that everybody can agree on so that we have compatibility between different systems. So a RESTful API is an architectural style. and it's an approach to communications. It's an agreed upon set of rules so everyone plays nicely. A RESTful API uses GET to receive a resource, PUT to change the state or update a resource, a POST that creates a resource, and a DELETE to remove it. And that's something that we've already talked about. And the RESTful API is a way to define our server so that it specifies what it can provide and how to use it. And in other words, the URL parameters should make sense. For example, if we're doing /profile, well, we expect that if it's a GET request, we're going to get a profile. If it's a POST request, we're going to add a profile. If it's a PUT, perhaps we're updating the profile, and this URL makes sense. And you can think of this as the noun of what we want to receive. The HTTP request is the verb, and everything after the slash is the noun. Now finally, REST APIs are something called stateless, meaning that calls can be made independently of one another, and each call contains all the data necessary to complete itself successfully. A server doesn't need to keep memorizing things. Each request that comes in has enough information that the server can respond with, regardless of who that person is. So in this example, let's build a small little app that has a RESTful API. Then if I send this, I see that now request.header have all these headers, but also name Sally.